If you want to understand why digital budgets fail but physical envelopes succeed, you need to look at the brain, not your bank account. This is a foundational masterclass in behavioral economics, covering everything you need to know about how your brain processes currency, the concept of the pain of paying, and the complete psychological framework of using physical envelopes. This is the reason you spend less paying with paper money than you do when you tap a card, even when the thing you're buying costs exactly the same. Over the next 10 minutes, we're unpacking the psychology of cash, why physical money stings to spend, how it quietly changes the price you'll agree to pay, why you remember cash purchases differently, and why we keep hoarding more of it even as we use it less. If budgeting matters to you, this ranks among the most useful things you can learn about your own brain, because the form your money takes is never neutral and it rewires your decisions without ever asking permission. Let's get into it. Part 1. The pain of paying. Everything else builds on one core idea, and researchers gave it a name that tells you exactly how it feels. They call it the pain of paying. Back in 1996, a researcher named Ofer Zellermeyer coined that phrase in his PhD dissertation at Carnegie Mellon University, working under the behavioral economist George Loewenstein. 2 years later, in 1998, Loewenstein joined forces with Drazen Prelec of MIT to publish the paper that anchors this whole field, a study with the memorable title, The Red and the Black: Mental Accounting of Savings and Debt. The heart of their argument is simple. Whenever you buy something, you often feel an immediate sting, a small but real jolt of psychological pain, and that pain chips away at whatever pleasure you were supposed to get from the purchase. They reached for the perfect everyday example, the ticking of a taximeter, because watching that number climb during the ride genuinely shrinks how much you enjoy the ride itself. Their central concept goes by the word coupling, and it describes how tightly your spending is bound to your consuming. When the moment you pay sits close to the moment you enjoy, in both time and experience, the payment hurts more, which means you spend with far more care. Cash is where that idea comes alive, because cash is the most transparent and the most painful way to hand over money. You see the bills, you count them out, and you watch them leave your fingers and cross the counter. Cards and digital payments sever that connection. They dull the sting, and once the sting fades, your restraint tends to fade right along with it. This connects to something deeper that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky identified in their foundational work on prospect theory. The observation that we feel losses roughly twice as strongly as equivalent gains. That asymmetry is part of why handing over cash registers as a genuine loss in a way that a card tap simply doesn't. Kahneman would later win the Nobel Prize for this body of work, and the pain of paying is, in many ways, prospect theory made personal. There's even a personality layer to all of this. A 2008 study from Rick, Kreider, and Loewenstein sorted people into what the authors playfully called tightwads and spendthrifts, where tightwads feel the pain of paying sharply and spendthrifts barely register it at all, which means some of us come wired to feel that jolt far more intensely than others. Part 2. The credit card premium. If cash genuinely hurts more, the obvious question is whether that sting actually changes how much money you'll surrender. And the answer turns out to be yes, with an effect size that honestly stunned the researchers who measured it. In 2001, Drazen Prelec and Duncan Semester ran a study under a brilliant title, Always Leave Home Without It. They built a sealed bid auction in which MIT participants bid on tickets to a sold-out Boston Celtics game, with one group instructed to pay in cash and the other instructed to pay by credit card. What came back was startling, because the average bid placed on a credit card landed nearly twice as high as the average cash bid. The authors described the effect in their own words as potentially reaching up to 100%, and they made a point of arguing this wasn't simply about people running short on cash, since the card itself appeared to loosen the wallet. Plenty of other work points the same direction. Dilip Soman of the University of Toronto studied what he termed payment transparency, meaning how visible and how present the act of paying actually feels in the moment. One of his field studies tracked the average amount people spent as it climbed from roughly $9 in cash up to nearly $12 by check and all the way to over $18 by credit card, with the same store and the same sorts of purchases, where the only thing that shifted was how the money left their hands. Researchers have even found that credit cards push us toward impulsive, unhealthy food purchases, the kind of vice buying that paying in cash tends to hold back. Part 3. The Denomination Effect. Here's a quirk your own brain runs that you can actually turn to your advantage. And behavioral scientists call it the Denomination Effect. In 2009, Priya Raghubir and Joydeep Srivastava published a study by that exact name in the Journal of Consumer Research, and their finding is both simple and surprisingly powerful. You're less willing to spend one large bill than you are to spend that identical amount once it's broken into smaller bills and coins. One of their experiments handed students a single dollar, where some received it as 4 quarters and others received it as one intact dollar bill, and then gave everyone the chance to buy candy. Among the students holding quarters, 63% bought the candy, yet among those clutching a single dollar bill, only 26% did. Sit with that for a second, because the amount of money never changed, and the only difference was that the whole, unbroken bill behaved almost like a tiny lockbox that people simply didn't want to crack open. The practical takeaway lands straight out of the research, which is that carrying larger denominations can work as a built-in brake on your spending, since breaking a 50 registers as a genuine decision in a way that peeling off 2 20s and a 10 somehow never quite does. This ties into a much bigger idea from the Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler, the concept he named mental accounting. Thaler, whose work on nudge theory alongside Cass Sunstein also earned him enormous influence in policy circles, showed that we refuse to treat all money as equal, even though a dollar is always a dollar, and instead we mentally sort it into separate pockets and separate purposes. Found money, meaning a refund, a bonus or a gift, feels frivolous, so we spend it freely. And Thaler captured the whole pattern when he put it this way, that we think of our money as being in different pockets, but the economy doesn't. Part 4. Cash to forget, card to remember. One of the more surprising recent discoveries has nothing to do with price and everything to do with memory and guilt. In 2023, Christopher Beckler, Suchi Huang, and Joshua Morris published a study whose title gives away the punchline: Consumers pay with card to remember and cash to forget. And they backed it with over 118,000 real-world purchases alongside 6 separate experiments. Their core finding is that the payment method we reach for is sometimes really about how we want to feel about a purchase down the road. When a purchase is easy to justify, we happily pull out a card and leave behind a clean record. But when the purchase carries guilt, something indulgent we'd rather not be reminded of, we reach for cash precisely because it leaves no paper trail and no electronic trail. The lead researcher framed it plainly, explaining that people choose less trackable methods like cash so they can erase the trail and forget the guilty purchase entirely. Cash also proves genuinely harder to track in memory while being more vivid in the moment. A German cafeteria study found that people recalled the amount they'd paid less accurately after using a card than after using cash, because the physical act of counting it out seems to burn the number deeper into your memory. Part 5. The Paradox of Cash. Given everything so far, the pain, the discipline, the sharper memory, you'd expect all of us to be clutching our cash, and yet we aren't, at least not when it comes to spending it. According to the Federal Reserve's Diary of Consumer Payment Choice, cash accounted for just 16% of payments in 2023 before slipping to 14% in 2024, trailing behind both credit and debit cards. The divide over who still reaches for it is stark, because households earning under $25,000 a year paid in cash 24% of the time, while households earning over $150,000 did so only 9% of the time. Cash matters most, it turns out, to the people who have the least. The FDIC's 2023 survey found that about 4.2% of US households, roughly 5.6 million of them, were unbanked, and 2/3 of those households leaned entirely on cash, which means that for millions of people, cash isn't a preference at all. It's the only system that actually works for them. Now here's where it gets strange, because even as we spend cash less, there's more of it floating around than ever before. By the end of 2024, US currency in circulation reached about $2.32 trillion, spread across more than 55 billion individual notes, and the single most numerous bill among them was the $100 note, which alone accounted for roughly 82% of all that value. The reason is that cash has quietly transformed from something we spend into something we hold. The Bank of England calls this the paradox of cash, where everyday transactional use keeps falling while the total value in circulation keeps rising, because people increasingly keep cash on hand as a store of value. You can read that shift in how long the bills survive, since a $1 note lasts only about 7 years as it races from hand to hand, whereas a $100 note endures for roughly 24 years because it mostly sits quietly in a drawer, a safe, or under a mattress. That hoarding instinct erupted during COVID-19, when, according to Federal Reserve tracking data, US currency in circulation surged by around $281 billion in a single year, a jump of roughly 16% as people stopped spending their cash and started stockpiling it for security. Conclusion: let's bring this back to where we started, because the form your money takes is never neutral. Cash hurts to spend, and that hurt is real enough that brain scans show the insula, the very region that registers physical pain, lighting up the moment you overpay, which is exactly what makes cash such a quietly powerful budgeting tool. Neuroscientist Brian Knudsen at Stanford worked alongside Lowenstein to document this in fMRI studies, showing that neuroeconomics isn't just theory, it's a measurable event in your brain. Paying in cash forces you to feel the money leave, it forces you to remember, and a single large bill makes you hesitate, and every one of those small frictions is the difference between spending $9 and spending $18. We're living through a genuinely odd moment where we hand over less and less physical money while clinging to more of it than ever, quietly hedging our bets and tucking a little security into our pockets, even as we tap and swipe through the rest of our days. So the next time you set out to rein in your spending, hold on to what decades of research keeps circling back to, that the most advanced budgeting tool ever invented might just be a small stack of paper bills you have to count, feel, and physically let go of. Because once paying feels like something real, you find yourself doing a whole lot less of it.